Hi, I am Hinakatan Parade, Associate Professor, Sikha অনুসন্ধান Linked University. In this presentation, we'll discuss about liquidity preference theory of interest. In a classical theory of interest, the rate of interest is a real phenomenon and it is determined in goods market by the intersection of saving and investment. Loanable funds theory of interest, by recognizing the stored value function of money, includes bank loans, reissuing, and disinvestment besides savings in supply of loanable funds and equates demand for investment with supply of savings to get the equilibrium rate of interest. But liquidity preference theory treats rate of interest as a purely monetary phenomenon, that is, a reward for parting with the liquidity, and takes the rate of interest determined in the money market by the intersection of demand for and supply of money. In his classic work, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, published in 1936, Professor Jenkins offered his view of how the interest rate is determined in the short run. That explanation is known as the theory of liquidity preference because it posits that the interest rates are just to balance the supply and demand for the economy's most liquidity asset, that is money. This theory asserts that the interest rate is one determinant of how much money people choose to hold. The reason is that the interest rate is the opportunity cost of holding money. It is what you forgo by holding money in liquid or cash, which does not bear interest rate. Liquidity preference means demand for cash or money. People prefer to keep their resources liquid because among various forms of assets, money is the most liquid form. Money can easily and quickly be changed in any form as and when we like. How much of resources people will hold in the form of cash and how much will be spent depend upon what Keynes calls liquidity preference. Cash being the most liquid asset, people prefer cash. Interest is a reward for parting with liquidity. When the interest rate rises, people want to hold less of their wealth in the form of money, liquid or cash. According to Keynes, the rate of interest will be determined at the point where demand for money, shortly we will call MD, equals supply money, shortly we will call MS. This can be written as MD is equal to MS. Keynes said that the people's liquidity preference arises out of three motives. First, the transaction motive, second, the precautionary motive, and third, the speculative motive. Transaction motive for liquidity preference. The transactions motive relates to the need of cash for the current transaction of personal and business exchanges. It is further divided into income and business motive. The income motive is meant to bridge the interval between the receipt of income and its disbursement. Similarly, business motive refers to the interval between the time of incurring business costs and that of the receipt of the sale proceeds. If the time between the incurring of expenditure and receipt of income is small, less cash will be held by the people for current transactions and vice versa. In addition to time lag in income and expenditure, the demand for liquidity for transaction motive depends upon the level of income and employment. The demand for liquidity for this motive is income elastic because it is the level of income by which the demand is determined. So we can say mathematically L1 is the function of Y, where L1 is the transaction motive for liquidity preference. Precautionary motive for liquidity preference. The precautionary motive relates to the desire to provide for contingencies required, certain expenditure for unforeseen opportunities of advantageous purchases. Both individual and businessmen keep cash in a reserve to meet unexpected needs. Individuals hold some cash to provide for illness, accidents, unemployment, and other unforeseen contingencies. cash in reserve to tide over unfavorable conditions or to gain from unexpected deals. The demand for liquidity for this motive is also income elastic. We can say the demand for precautionary motive for money is a function of the level of income, or L1 is F of Y. Poor people keep less while rich people keep high amount of money for meeting this motive. Speculative motive for liquidity preference. Money held under the speculative motive is for securing profit from knowing better than market what the future will bring forth. Individuals and business have funds after keeping enough for transactions and precautionary purposes, like to gain by investing in shares, debentures, bonds, government securities, and making loans and advances to individuals, businessmen, and traders. Money held for speculative purpose is a liquid store of value which can be invested at an opportune moment in interest-bearing bonds or securities. There is an inverse relationship between interest rate and the demand for money. That is, more demand for money at lower interest rate and less demand at higher interest rate. The demand for money for speculative motive is income inelastic and it is interest elastic. That means the demand for money for speculative motive is not depending on the income of the people, rather it depends on the interest rate. Demand for liquidity preference. The total demand for money or liquidity is denoted by these three motives. The first two motives are income elastic, which is denoted by L1 is F of Y, while the demand for speculative motives is interest elastic and it can be denoted by L2 is equal to F of R, where R is the rate of interest. The total demand for liquidity preference LP is equal to L1 plus L2, that is LP is equal to F of Y plus F of R. Graphical representation of the demand for liquidity preference given in the diagram. In the diagram, we observe the MT refers to the transaction motive for demand for money, which is interest inelastic, that indicates whatever may the level of interest, the demand for money for transaction and precautionary motive is remaining same. Whereas the demand for money for speculative motive is downward sloping, indicating more money will be demanded for speculative purpose at lower interest rate and vice versa. Now, adding these two, we are getting the total demand for money, which starts at the transaction demand for money level, and again it is sloping downward from left to right, indicating more money will be demanded at lower interest rate and vice versa. Coming to supply of liquidity preference. The supply of money refers to the total quantity of money in the country for all purposes at any time. It consists of coins, currency notes, and demand deposits. The supply of money in an economy is determined by the policies of the government and the central bank of the country. Though the supply of money is a function of the rate of interest to a degree, yet it is considered to be fixed by the monetary authorities. That is, the supply curve of money is taken as perfectly inelastic and is a vertical straight line. And this is represented in the diagram, where the MS refers to the supply of money curve, which is a vertical straight line indicating it remains constant irrespective of the level of interest in the economy. Determination of the rate of interest. The equilibrium rate of interest is determined by the interaction between the liquidity preference function, that is the demand for money, and the supply of money. Mathematically, the equilibrium rate of the interest is determined where MD is equal to MS. Now, taking the demand function f of y plus f of r, now we have the equilibrium conditions f of y plus f of r is equal to MS. MD and MS curves in the diagram given is intersecting at point E, and this is the equilibrium point, and corresponding to this OR naught is the equilibrium rate of interest. This rate of interest is supposed to be stable. Any situation of disequilibrium, if market rate of interest is either greater than or less than equilibrium rate of interest, sets the market forces in motion to restore the equilibrium. If market rate of interest is greater than the equilibrium rate of interest, let market rate of interest is R2, which is greater than the equilibrium rate of interest R0. In this situation, bond prices go down and people prefer to hold bonds. Demand for money decreases by the amount AB. People's idle cash balances reduces. The bearish factor in the market speculates a fall in the interest rate and a rise in bond prices, because interest rate and bond prices, they are inversely related to each other. This creates demand for idle cash balances. This implies a movement from point A to point E on the demand curve for money. Excess supply of money disappears and equilibrium in the market is restored, and rate of interest falls to OR naught. If market rate of interest is less than the equilibrium rate of interest, let market rate of interest is R1, which is less than the equilibrium rate of interest R0. Bond prices go up and preference for cash holding increase. Demand for money increases by the amount CD in the diagram. People's idle cash balance increases. Since there is a shortage of money in the money market, people began to expect a rise in the interest rate. Demand for idle cash balance decreases. This implies a movement from point D to point E on the demand curve for money. That indicates the rate of interest will increase up to the point OR naught. At this level, excess demand for money disappears and equilibrium is restored in the money market. Now, what is the effect of changes in the money market on the interest rate? The changes in the demand for money and or supply of money in the money market bring about a change in the interest rate. Change in the demand for money may be due to the change in either transaction demand for money or speculative demand for money. Here we are taking transaction demand for money together with the precautionary motive for demand for money. A change in the transaction demand for money arises due to changes in income level, and demand for money shifts either upward or downward. Increase in income level results an increase in transaction demand for money and upward shift in the demand curve for money. Speculative demand for money depends on the expectations regarding the changes in the normal rate of interest. If people expect a fall in the interest rate below its normal level, they expect bond prices to go up and they demand more money for speculative purposes. This causes a rightward shift in the curve for speculative demand for money. Coming first to the change in transaction demand for money. The analysis is explained to the diagram given. Assume in period 1, income level is represented by Y1 and the corresponding transaction demand for money and the total demand for money is represented through the curve MT1 and MD1 respectively. With given money supply MS, equilibrium rate of interest is OR1. In period 2, assume money income increases to Y2. When money income increases to Y2, this increases the transaction demand for money to OMT2 and increase by the magnitude MT1, MT2. Speculative demand for money remaining same. Transaction demand for money shifts to MD2. To acquire the increased transaction cash balance, the bondholders begin to sell their bonds. As a result, bond prices go down and the rate of interest increases in the money market. This process continues until people acquire the required transaction cash balances. At the end of the process, the transaction cash balance increases to its required level MT1, MT2, and the speculative cash balances decreases by the same amount MT1, MT2. Finally, a new equilibrium is reached at the point E2 with a higher transaction cash balance OMT2, with lower speculative cash balances MT1, MT2, and a higher rate of interest OR2. So, we can conclude, ceteris paribus, an increase in transaction demand for money increases transaction cash balance and interest rate, but decreases speculative cash balance. Now coming to if there is a change in speculative demand for money. Similarly, assume in period 1, total demand for money is represented through the curve MD. With given money supply MS, equilibrium rate of interest is achieved at OR1, and this equilibrium rate of interest is also known as the normal rate of interest. Assume in period 2, more people expect a fall in the rate of interest than those who expect a rise in it. Then the speculative demand for money rises. Assume it is rises by MDMS. Total money demand curve shifts rightward, intersecting the money supply at E2. Now equilibrium rate of interest at OR2. If the rise in the speculative demand for money is more than MDMS, the new equilibrium rate of interest will be higher than OR2. Change in money supply. Change in money supply and its effect on the rate of interest is explained through the diagram given. Assume in period 1, given total demand for money MD and supply money MS, equilibrium or normal rate of interest is OR3. Assume again the central bank of the country increases money supply. Increases money supply from MS1 to MS2. As a result, the equilibrium rate of interest decreases from OR3 to OR2. The people tend to hold more cash balances for speculative motive. Again, assume money supply increases to MS3. When money supply increases to MS3, the rate of interest falls to OR1. Fall in the rate of interest with increase in money supply continues till the stage of liquidity trap is reached. And in the diagram, the stage of liquidity trap is reached at the interest rate level OR0, with the money supply MS4. After that, any further increase in money supply will not push interest rate further down. Rate of interest cannot fall to 0. What are the criticisms labeled against the liquidity preference theory of interest? First, this theory is indeterminate, inadequate, and misleading. Professor Hazlitt and Robertson maintain that the Keynesian theory of interest rate, like the classical theory, is indeterminate, inadequate, and misleading. In the Keynesian version, the liquidity preference function, preferably for transaction and out of precautionary motive, will shift up or down with changes in the level of income. Until and unless we know the level of income, the demand for money cannot be known and the rate of interest remains indeterminate. Professor Keynes has failed in explaining this point. The second criticism, it is one-sided theory and have limited scope. According to Hazlitt, the Keynesian theory of interest appears to be one-sided as it ignores real factors. Keynes considers interest to be a purely monetary phenomenon and refused to believe that real factors like productivity and time preference had any influence on the rate of interest. Thus, the theory is applicable in monetary economies only and cannot be applied to non-monetary economies. Third criticism, role of saving has been ignored. Keynes has ignored the element of saving. He considered interest as a reward for parting with liquidity. According to Professor Weiner, Without saving, there can be no liquidity to surrender. The rate of interest is the return for saving without liquidity. As such, the element of saving cannot be ignored in any theory of interest. The fourth criticism, the theory has completely failed to explain depressionary situation. It goes directly contrary to the facts that it presumes to explain. If the theory were right, the rate of interest would be the highest precisely at the bottom of the depression when, due to falling prices, people's preference for liquidity is the strongest. On the contrary, the rate of interest is at the bottom during depression. Fifth criticism, the theory ignores productivity of capital. Some critics are of this opinion that interest is not only a reward for parting with liquidity as stressed by Keynes. They have written that interest is the reward paid to the lender for the productivity of capital. As such, interest is mostly paid because capital is productive. Sixth criticism, it focuses attention on the short term and ignores the long period. The Keynesian theory concentrates only on the short term and completely ignores the long period of time. But from capital investment point of view, it is a long term rather than a short term rate of interest, which is of course significant. Seventh criticism, that is fundamental error in Keynesian analysis. There is confusion in Keynesian analysis about the relation between rate of interest and the amount of money. On the one hand, he says that the demand for money is inversely dependent on the rate of interest, and on the other, that the equilibrium rate of interest is inversely dependent on the amount of money. Keynes has not made any distinction between the two propositions and often uses them in an identical manner.